I think if you're going to make an issue of Usman Khawaja playing golf the day before, you have to also note that Mitchell Starc played golf the day before the first test and took 7 wickets.
I thought in the first innings it was the best bowling performance by an overseas team I'd seen in Australia since the West Indies in 1989.
You know, I can see him winning, but it goes without saying they have to win this test.
I think Bazball is at the crossroads. Can you imagine 4 more tests of this?
When we talk about Khawaja turning 39 soon, Lyon's 38. I mean, these are no spring chickens from a cricket perspective. So I would leave Lyon out. He's barely been bowling.
Welcome back to the Code Cricket Show, and unlike any of the players involved in the Ashes, there is no golf days for us. We're here recording ahead of the second test at the Gabba. Ben Horn in the studio with me, Dan Cherney and Craddock down the line. And let's start with the big story ahead of the second test. Usman Khawaja, he's placed in the side, he's seemingly under threat after the injury that he carried potentially into the first test. We're not quite sure yet, but the Australian cricket team at this stage is saying they are unrelated. But Ben, let's start with you. You were over in Perth. What's the latest on Aussie and I guess both his back and his potential spot on the side?
Yeah, look, I think the back is the pertinent question, Lockie. I think if Usman can prove his fitness, I still expect him to hold his position in the team. It's a tight one, obviously, because of how well Travis Head went as an opener, but I just don't think Australia's quite at the point where they see Travis Head as their permanent opener. So I expect Usman to get this test match, but he'll be under pressure if he gets there. But yeah, I guess the thing we are waiting for is just to make sure he gets the tick off with his back. Back spasms can be unpredictable. I think there's confidence that he'll be right, but probably a bit too early to say.
Dan, let's talk about this story because it definitely kind of consumed a lot of headlines, a lot of airtime across the past week or so. Usman Khawaja playing golf, it's something he's done as long as he's probably played cricket as well. I mean, a couple of days out from an Ashes test, it might be a poor look. Some people have drawn the bow that it's irresponsible. Where do you kind of sit in terms of just how kind of big an issue this is in terms of Usman playing golf?
I'm actually a really strong defender of Usman Khawaja on this one. I think if you're going to, make an issue of Usman Khawaja playing golf the day before the first test and all that happened, clearly the circumstances were not ideal, and it was not a great situation for Australia. But you have to also note that Mitchell Starc played golf the day before the first test and took 7 wickets on the first day before tee, and took 10 for the match in 2 days. So Usman Khawaja's done this for a long time. He's a very avid golfer. He's a very good golfer by all accounts. I think his Stableford points scores would suggest as much. Look, 3 days of golf is a lot for anyone, but it's not to say that he wasn't in the nets training heavily too. I don't think there was a pre-existing issue. I don't think if there was a pre-existing issue, Usman Khawaja would put himself in threat of, would have sought to play golf and threatened himself there. So I think people look. It's a good headline. It was a good story, an interesting story. I understand why there was interest, but no, I very much back Usman in here. I think there are very legitimate concerns as to whether he's still up to it as a cricketer, as a Test cricketer, particularly against quality pace and in the slips cordon. My personal view is that I think on those fronts he's just about done, and I think that it would be quite reasonable for them to leave him out of the second test. But in terms of his preparation, his commitment to the team, I think questioning that and joining the dots here is too far. And yeah, I defend him strongly there.
Benny, it's Black Friday time. The sales are here. Is there anything you're going to be looking out for?
Probably one of those classic North Sydney Bears retro jerseys, I reckon, mate.
Very good. But something that won't set you back that much is Code Sports' Black Friday offer. Just $19 for 12 months. Incredible value. Make sure to check out the offer that ends on December 1st. The link is in the description. Crash, you're someone who has had a lot to do with Usman since he moved up from New South Wales to Queensland, has been a mainstay up there, the skipper up there for a lot of years as well. We're coming into a pink ball day-night test against England where the Aussies, if they take a 2-0 lead in this series, it could just be about the Ashes wrapped up. Where do you sit in terms of the selection debate that's going on at the moment? Do you think Usman, I guess, deserves that extra chance to go out on his own terms?
Probably just do, but And the other reason is I thought Steve Harmison spoke very well in a column today when he said, it sounds so easy, doesn't it? Oh, leave Trav at opener, Travis Head. But then there's all these other issues. I mean, what happens if Trav starts fencing wide of his body and the ball seaming and snicking? And he can get into that mode. What? Do you have a number 8th choice batsman come in after David Warner 2 years ago? You shuffle the deck again, and then you've got no Travis Head in the middle order to clean up your mess. And you've got 2 new openers together. So, and then, what if, say, Josh Inglis came in the middle order, shone, but Travis failed? So what if it half succeeded? So I think that I didn't mind what Andrew McDonald said about that's that nice option of having Head there for the second innings as a stormtrooper. It's not a bad idea, actually, and Khawaja first up. But it is a very legitimate debate. It really is. Usman is right near the end. And it'll be interesting to see. I tend to think he's just holding on and probably should, and he may just have a last little kick in him, but he has to pass that fitness test, and it's not easy. He had the flight across the Nullarbor, 4.5 hours with a sore back. So, it's all about reflexes, isn't it? That back has to be right.
Dan, I've sort of selected my 11 as we all have for this next test. I guess you could say I've probably had a bit of a bet each way, but I like the idea of Travis Head staying as an opener, not permanently, but I just think in this series, he's shown the blueprint that against England's fast bowlers, getting at them early, especially on spicier wickets, which I think we'll see again in Brisbane. I think that is the correct mode. But I would give Usman another chance, batting him down at number 5. I think that I think just being a senior player, what he's contributed, I think, he was sort of promised 2 tests, or it looked like he had the first 2 tests. I'd give that to him. And I do think there's a role he could play at 5 in terms of, pink ball tests. You do get situations where middle order players come in under lights, and it's basically like opening. So I don't mind that as a bit of a funky strategy. I'm not sure whether they would think down those lines, but what's your 11, Dan? Because, I know that you've got a couple of different theories about, how Australia might want to line up for this test match.
Look, obviously there's clear, you've got to make a clear point that this is fitness pending for a few guys. Obviously there's question marks around Khawaja's fitness, around Cummins' fitness. Clearly need to have a look at the wicket, the weather. There are varying factors. So you're picking a team more than a week out from the toss is always fraught with some danger. But leaving that to one side, I would be, and look, big calls, I would be leaving 225 tests worth of experience in the form of Usman Khawaja and Nathan Lyon out. Look, having been there and seen what happened on the other day in Perth, it was just, I don't know, it was so enticing, the idea of Travis Head doing this ongoing. I think Australia has been grasping for openers, and I think Usman, to a degree, has been lucky that his opening partner has fared worse than he has, whoever that's been, whether it was Nathan McSweeney, whether it was Sam Constas, David Warner, I suppose, towards the back end of his career. Usman has been the senior partner in these partnerships and has did an excellent job those first 18 months. But as I sort of touched on earlier, I think there's a long-standing trend now where he's really struggling against quality fast bowling, and I don't think that his issues in the slips cordon can be ignored either, particularly given the prospect of bringing Bo Webster into the side, who's an outstanding slips fieldsman. I would bring him in, and I would bring Josh Inglis in. I think Nathan Lyon, through very little fault of his own. I mean, now maybe he's not going quite as well as he had at his peak, but that's to be expected. He's 38. And we talk about Khawaja turning 39 soon. Lyon's 38. I mean, these are no spring chickens from a cricket perspective. So I would leave Lyon out. He's barely been bowling. Across pink ball tests, I mean, they left him out of the last pink ball test in the West Indies. That was different. That was the Dukes. But I think the other thing in Brisbane that's easy to forget is the sun goes down in Brisbane really early, 6:30, and it's dark. The last 2.5 hours of every day's play are going to be played as night sessions. And in night sessions are where you want your seamers doing their work. And I just think, and we know the over rates as well these days, that's a large chunk of today's cricket. I just don't see where Nathan Lyon's going to play a big role in this test. Now, it's always a risk not going in with a spinner, but I think there's I think that if you do go in with him, there's every chance he plays a very peripheral role, as he has. 4 of Australia's last 8 non-Asian tests, he's bowled 10 overs or less. That's nothing. That's just why pick him? So I would go Josh Inglis in the middle order, and at 6, I would keep move Cameron Green up to 5, head opening, and I bring in Bo Webster to bat at 8, and I would actually leave Pat Cummins out for another test, get him cherry ripe for Adelaide, and keep Brendan Doggett, who I think did a very good job in Perth.
Yeah, Dan, it's interesting. I reckon that what Dan's saying about Nathan Lyon, I mean, that potentially, if Pat Cummins is to play this test, that could be his avenue back into the team, because if they feel that the conditions aren't going to be right for Nathan Lyon, but they've got the other 3 quicks there, perhaps that's how they feel comfortable getting Pat Cummins back in there, similar to the role that Mark Wood played for England in the first test. You can sort of limit his amount of overs, I suppose, and use him as a bit of an impact man. But I haven't ruled that possibility out either.
I think we saw him bowling in the nets this week alongside Josh Hazlewood, and he's certainly looking impressive, Pat Cummins. For me, the other one, when I picked my 11 for this test, that I don't think you can discount, is someone like Michael Neser. I mean, we saw him come into that test squad, obviously through a few injuries, Sean Abbott, Josh Hazlewood, but his record with the pink ball we've seen across the past couple of years in that Ashes series in 2021. I think he's someone who could come into that team if needed, if they really want someone who, yes, he's not going to bowl those 140 plus speeds, but at 130, 135, he's going to move that pink ball well. He knows the Gabba well. Crash, do you think there's any chance someone like a Michael Neser could come into considerations, or are we maybe just going a little bit too far ahead in terms of making changes for change's sake?
I've got him narrowly missing out. I'll give him about a 20% chance. One thing I've noticed is that when Michael Neser's got a pink ball in his hand at the Gabba and it's under lights, the first 4 or 5 overs are a desperate struggle for batsmen. Like, he wobbles it around, and they're a funny little thing, that pink ball. They're almost plasticky, and they almost leave a comet-like trail. And so, but particularly against Neser, there's just a little bit of almost like a magician feel about it. So there is that. There is that. He would pay his way, Neser, if you put him in that test. May well be his last test. But I've got him, if you said, I've got him 20%, 15%. Cummins would not have to play. They'd have to do a little bit of funky stuff. But you don't always get in life what you deserve. It always pained me that Damien Fleming never played a test in England. He could have just swung the ball. He would have been great, but he never got that chance. And I'd love to see Michael get this test, but I just can't see how he gets it.
Dan, just one more part of the Aussie team I want to chat about. Obviously, we saw Scott Boland have sort of 2 contrasting innings in that first test. He was probably bowling a little bit too full, but that's kind of what Perth dictates. You've got to get the ball up, try and get it moving around, try and draw the edge. He got that length right in the second innings, and we saw him get a lot of wickets from it. Are you happy with Scott Boland being sort of the opening bowler alongside Mitch Starc, if that's kind of the way the Aussies line up again? Or do you think there's a world where they might switch to Doggett? Or I guess ideally there is a world where Cummins comes back into the team and can take that new ball?
Look, I think if Cummins comes back, he'll take the new ball with Starc. I mean, Cummins has been an outstanding, he's the world's best first change bowler, isn't he? Given how often that Hazlewood's done the job. One guy, not for this test, but was very impressed with his performances with the new ball in the Shield was Xavier Bartlett, just as an aside. I think he's coming with a bullet. Not that he's absolutely express, but I think he's going to play a fair bit of cricket for Australia going forward. In terms of this test, Boland, I was just because of Steve Smith leaving the door ajar and being quite cryptic as to who was going to take the new ball alongside Starc in Perth, going to that day, I was sort of thinking Doggett was going to do it. In the end, they went with Boland, who's obviously the more senior player. It didn't pay off early, but clearly they got the result they wanted in the long run. I don't think it matters a huge deal. Now, I suppose the pink ball changes things a bit, but Scott Boland's done, and he's got a hat-trick with the pink ball in Test cricket, so he's clearly a very capable bowler with any ball in that format. For me, it was more around his lengths, and even he actually offered a bit more width to the England players. He offered to their top order. He tempted them, teased them, and they just fell into the trap again and again and again, looking to drive on the up. And that was the spell that turned the match. I think it's easy to forget, given what happened with Head and obviously with Starc's outstanding test, taking 10 wickets. I think Scott Boland's role was critical there. I suspect they go with Boland to open again if it is the same or a similar attack, if it is Stark, Doggett and Boland. I think Doggett at the end, his wickets tended to come. It certainly wasn't the prettiest of five wicket match hauls. There were a lot of sort of bounces that got caught down the leg side and some strange little deflections and the like. But he did his job. And I think that's one of the great things with Brendan Doggett. He's versatile. He can play he can bowl the short stuff if need be, but he obviously can also pitch it up really well and generate some swing. So he's a very good bowler in that respect. Versatile. He can bowl bulk overs, but he didn't need to in that test. So I think they'll back him in because I think they think he's a better bowler than Michael Neser at pink ball, or red ball.
Think you're a cricket expert? Prove it with our new game, Matchup. It's our daily puzzle where you'll be given 12 different tiles with players, stats, and you've got to find the hidden themes. Whether you love your big bash, your test cricket, or your domestic cricket, this is where you get your bragging rights. Don't blaze outside off stump too early because you only get the 4 mistakes before you're timed out. Start playing Matchup today.
Crash, you were sort of dubious, I guess, before the series about England's fast bowlers' ability to get through multiple tests in this series. And obviously it was a 2-day test. It was hardly the most arduous workload that bowlers have ever been put through. But what's your take on the England bowlers coming into this test at the Gabba, Crash? Have they got another big burst in them, or have they run their race, do you feel?
The secret hurdle is simply this, that the disappearing acts of their batsmen just crucifies the bowlers. Now, it's okay saying, gee, they didn't do that much work in the first innings in Perth, and then they were so different in the second. But you think of it, they're human beings. Mark Wood hadn't played since the 26th of February. Suddenly he's playing a test match. He wouldn't have slept that night. So much anxiety the night before, you know what I mean? And then suddenly he's padded up out to bat. And then at the bowling crease, I thought in the first innings it was the best bowling performance by an overseas team I'd seen in Australia since the West Indies in 1989. It was relentless, outstanding, precise, really good. But they were tired in the second innings. They didn't have the fibre. Atkinson even, he hasn't played a lot of first-class cricket. So it's okay. That's the hidden curse of Bazball. They don't give their bowlers enough rest. And that's why, I reckon they'll come out in the first innings and, again, be much better than the second innings because they won't get the break, So Archer bowled really well. And Mark Wood went wickless. He was still good. But if you're only going to get 32 overs break or something like that between innings, you're tired and you're vulnerable. And so I love their quality. They've got it. But for God's sake, give them a bit of a spell. You know what I mean? Like, it's tough.
Dan, it's 1-0 to Australia. Everything almost went England's way in the lead up to that first test. No Hazelwood, no Cummins. Khawaja's injury, they had to move things around. They just struggled from the moment it started. 170 odd in their first innings. It was clear that that was never going to be enough, even if they did kind of get on top of the Aussie batters in that first innings. How does England retain or reclaim the Ashes from here? Is there any world where you can see that happening right now?
Long way back, Lockie. I suppose we've seen the peaks of Bazball are good enough and high enough that you could see it happening. There is a world in which it happens. I mean, even within that test match, the 2 days, there were significant periods in which England were all over Australia, even with the bat. Now, not for long, but you could see periods in which Australia was sort of scratching their heads a little bit. Clearly there's some players that can take the game away very quickly. And I suppose we haven't seen Joe Root or Ben Stokes get going with the bat yet. So that gives them a little bit of hope that things could turn around. Duckett got some runs. Ollie Pope got some runs. Jamie Smith showed a bit. So there's something to work with there. But I'm with Crash, fundamentally. I think it's we saw the best of their bowling, but how are they going to be able to do this consistently if they're only batting for, even if they're batting for 50, 60 overs, 70 overs, it still doesn't feel like enough, given that their whole weapon is the fact that these guys can bowl at 90 miles plus an hour, all 5 of them, if you include Josh Tongue. sort of 143 kilometres an hour plus and do it consistently. But if they can't do it consistently, then they're kryptonite. They become it's like the Space Jam movie. They're no longer the Monstars. They're just cartoon characters. And that's a very obscure reference for those playing at home. But I just don't necessarily see it all coming together. And I think the other thing is the batting. It will come off at some point this series. I think I predicted before the series 4-1, and I still think that'll be the case. I think at some stage everything will click for England, and they'll probably have a comprehensive win. They can win by an innings. They can win by 500 runs.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is the slightest slither of hope for England, just in the fact that game in Perth, and I don't want to diminish the impacts of guys like Scott Bowen and Marnus Labuschagne, who had some really nice moments in that test. But if you take Mitchell Starc and you take Travis Head out of Australia's performance in Perth, we're talking about a very even ball game. And I think England have a team where they also have these mercurial players who can just come off like that. Harry Brook, he's got that sort of innings in him where he can just go bananas. And I think the unpredictability of the pink ball test works into their favour in terms of being desperate here. I mean, if they can just get on the right side of the conditions and the night sessions and they're the ones who have someone come off in this test, I can see them winning. But it goes without saying they have to win this test. I mean, I thought they had to win the first test to be any chance. But look, if they are able to pull off an upset here and it's 1-1, Australia will be nervous because they certainly were nervous for large parts of that Perth test. So I think Australia's definitely in the ascendancy, but I don't think it's quite over.
It feels like it's almost a lot more on the line than just the Ashes in this test. Crash, you had a fantastic chat with Paul Newman at English Journo, apparently with The Athletic a couple of days ago on CODE, which if our listeners haven't already gone and watched, I highly recommend. And one of the big things he said was that almost a loss in Brisbane is the nail in their coffin of Bazball, that Bazball could be deemed a failure if they lose in Brisbane. What did you make of those comments? Because they felt very strong.
And very relevant. I think Bazball is really, it's at the crossroads, to be honest with you. I know McCullum came in when they'd lost 1 out of 17 tests, and I know they've only lost about 2 out of 13 series since he's taken over. But Australia's where you're marked, and think of the heat they've copped in the last week. And I know a lot of the English journos are saying, gee, hasn't the response focused a lot on England? But hours ago, I heard Ian Healy say that if they lose this series badly, he expects McCullum to go. Like, can you imagine 4 more tests of this, of the sort of vitriol that's heading their way? So it is absolutely at the crossroads, and they can, no matter what happens after this series, I think they'll struggle to absorb a really bad series loss. We say it all the time, but isn't it incredible? In our lifetimes, there's been no close Ashes series in Australia. And that's what I think people are frustrated about. When you've got the Barmy Army turning up against them, and they have. I quoted George Gallantry, a senior Army official, yesterday. He said, mate, I love the team. That's not the way you play cricket. I mean, they've spent thousands upon thousands of dollars coming out to Australia, 30,000 fans to be entertained for 2 days. Yes, it was absorbing entertainment, but the game has to be better than that. So are they on trial? Absolutely.
Now, Dan, not that this has ever happened to you, but if there was a world where you had maybe not happy with an article you had produced a couple of days earlier and you thought, okay, I need to get my head back in the game. I want to do a little bit of a practice run. Let's write a few more articles. Let's go out to a Shield game, a one-day cup game, and get my head back in the groove. That's the I guess, scenario that England found themselves in, particularly the batters. They had an option to maybe go to Canberra, find a bit of form with the pink ball under lights. Are you surprised they haven't taken up at least some of those high-profile batters that option?
Happens most days, Lockie. No. Yeah, I am. Well, no, I'm not surprised. I'm just disappointed. I'm not surprised because we know how headstrong Bazball is now. They don't deviate from their plans, and they're so stubborn to a fault, and go down their way. And I suppose maybe there is some honour in that, but there's also just some, I don't know, just such a wasted opportunity in my view. I'm not saying for everyone, but you can't tell me Zach Crawley wouldn't benefit from some time in the middle. Like, surely for someone like that, as an example, catching with the pink ball. Now, I know you can train, But there's nothing like a bit of match practice. And I know it's a little bit disruptive to send some guys somewhere and some another, but they were budgeting. Well, maybe they weren't budgeting on it, but officially they were budgeting on 5 days cricket in Perth. Maybe they officially budgeted on. Maybe internally they budgeted on 3 or 4. They're going to have gone into this next test having not played any cricket in what will it be 11 days. Clearly they'll be training, but 2 days in Canberra, there are worse things in the world. Just do it, would have been my advice. But no, not surprised, because that's the way they operate. And, they will have to be judged in accordance with their actions. If it works, they're geniuses. But if it doesn't, then they are fools and they will be held accountable.
Tell you what will look bad is if they lose this test and they've got a holiday planned at Noosa, which they have after this test, and you can't escape from the paparazzi at Noosa. Like, it's basically one beach, and these hotels, like, there's no, you can't say, oh, I slipped the paparazzi, I hid here. Not at Noosa, you can't. Like, that could be a very testy little holiday, I would say. There'll be the occasional drone flying over the beach, I'm sure, if they're 2-0 down. It's not the place to disappear, Noosa. So I'm sure they were booked with the most sincere intent that, we probably 1-1 and have a little stress relief at Noosa. Yeah, okay.
I was just saying to Crash before we recorded that I'm going to put my hand up to cover England's tour match in Noosa if need be. More than happy to do that one for the team.
Well, I think one thing we know is, unlike the last Ashes series out here in Australia, there won't be any complaints from the England side about the conditions. Obviously, COVID enforced last time, but they've had everything, I guess, their way, how they wanted it. Even Mark Wood was thinking about driving across the country from Perth to Brisbane until someone informed him. That might take a little bit of time if you really wanted to do that. But Benny, to wrap things up, do you foresee any changes to this England side for the second test? I mean, we might see maybe Mark Wood potentially rested if he's not quite as fit as England says he is. But do you think there's really any need for them to change anything outside that?
No, I don't think they will. And Mark Wood has to play, in my opinion. I mean, it's just all about this test. I mean, if they go 2-0 down, you can forget about it. I mean, I know they came back from 2-0 down in England last time, but it's a completely different situation in Australian conditions. If they lose this test, it's over. So Mark Wood has to play. The only thing that I've got a little watch on is Jacob Bethel in Canberra. He's the one guy in that match that there's a big opportunity for him, I think, with Zach Crawley making a pair. I think, and Bethel really does fit into the Bazball mantra. In fact, if he'd had a decent series in New Zealand leading into this series, I reckon he just about would have played the first test. So if Bethel can go out and make 100 against the Prime Minister's 11, that could be an interesting conversation for the England selectors. But no, I think chances are England will back in the same team, and they've just got to throw everything at it.
Crash, we'll leave the final word to you, since the whole cricketing world is coming up to your neck of the woods in basically a bit under a week's time. There might be some shoulders that you'll be needing them to cry on because of what happens in this test at the Gabba. As we know, it could be the death of Bazball. But what happens in Brisbane, Crash? What happens? What will we be talking about in a bit over a week's time?
I'll predict that England will have one day that shocks us, and we'll go, "Whoa, didn't see that coming." When suddenly they flip the narrative and have a great day, but then more of the same. And Mitchell Starc, to enhance his reputation as the pink ball prince, on a wicket which has had saturation from the storm after storm. And I know it's been covered, but there's only so much you can cover a wicket. It's still part of the earth. And I think it'll be a little bit of grass on the deck. It'll be the same length of grass as if this was a day test. And sad to say it, I think that's trouble for England. So they'll do something that shocks us in this test, and we'll all hurriedly rewrite, as I made a fool of myself the other day in Perth, writing about England's comeback when they were leading by 1 for 105, and I put my little column in, and it went to Country New South Wales, and I've been sort of hiding away from people texting me and saying, "You're an idiot, were you watching television?" But you get caught, don't you, between editions. But a few twists and turns, but an Australian victory.
Well, Mitch Starc at the pink ball, I think we'll be seeing an SCG statue before too long if his record continues. He's been in fine form, and have all of you been today in this podcast. So thank you, Benny, Dan, and Crash for joining us. Make sure to check out the Black Friday code subscription offer that all the details will be in our description, and we'll catch you next time.